You have these really successful women or men who are so good at so many things that it's actually quite easy to then be on the wrong path, because it's like, oh, well, I could do this and I can do it well, but does it feel the best? And when you can do lots of different things, I think that is the big thing to listen out for in terms of your intuition. Okay, yeah, even if you are good at something, and that can be confusing. It's like, well, I'm really good at it, and other people say I'm good at it, but it's all about the intuition, and it's all about how you feel when you're doing it.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. So the guest we have on today's podcast, I recently discovered after reading her book, Living in Tune, 21 Questions to Activate Your Intuition and Find Your Purpose. So she is an award-winning soulful business coach, helping entrepreneurs from around the world in the wellness space. With a background lecturing in marketing and branding at a master's degree level, she knows just what it takes to become an abundant and soul-led CEO. Named the Emerging Voice of 2020 by Kindred Spirit magazine, one of the 5 most influential female coaches of 2021 by Entrepreneur Mogul, and one of the 50 under 50 for 2022 by the NYC Journal. She is on a mission to help you find success that makes your soul happy. And I'm so excited to introduce you to Liz Roberta. Liz, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a great introduction.
Like I said, I recently discovered you, and actually through my wife, who started reading your book, and she was listening to it on audiobook, and I kept finding myself literally walking through and pausing and just like being totally caught up in everything that you said, because I resonate very, very deeply with how when we tap into that inner voice, our intuition, and really begin to listen to that versus what our external world has told us we should be listening to, it's really when we start to step into the beauty of life and how life can start unfolding based upon our terms. So for those of our listeners that aren't familiar with your work and aren't familiar with your book, why don't you take just a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of really what you're all about?
Yeah, well, you already did a great introduction. So I've had this business since 2018. So I've been doing it for a few years now. Got my book done in 2020. And I actually started off in the business doing tarot readings. So I've been reading tarot since I was 14, which is a really long time. And when I was a teenager, I had black hair. I had my lip pierced in 2 places. No one can ever believe it now, because now I'm like long blonde hair, pretty feminine, so people can never believe it. But I was really gothic, and I'm still a goth at heart. So I loved anything witchy, and I read tarot. And at sleepovers with my friends, I would always read tarot for them. And I say at the beginning of the book, ever since I was a child, I was always spiritual. I used to do spells in year 6. I'd spend my pocket money buying the right colored candle, the right essential oils to do spells. It was just always in me. I went to a Catholic school. My brother is a reverend. It didn't really come from anything around me. And this is this was the early days of internet. We're talking the 90s. So it's not like I got it from Instagram. It's not like I got it from TikTok. It was just very, very innate within me. It was always there. So I think I was always destined to do this work at some point. But for the vast majority of my life, I never believed that it could be a career. And I didn't even believe you were meant to be doing something you enjoyed. So I followed a path of economics. That's what I studied for my bachelor's degree. And then I went into investment bank at grad scheme at JP Morgan doing operations. And it didn't take long for me to realize that I was miserable as hell. I was in a gray suit, but I'd done really well. And I was so proud of myself, because I did not come up with money. Like, my stepdad was a lorry driver. We didn't have anything, I never went abroad or anything like that. So it was such a big achievement. And I was really proud of myself for getting there. But I think that just added to my confusion and the conflict I was feeling within, because, I wasn't ungrateful in any way for where I had got to, but then why was I so unhappy? And it started to make me physically ill. So I was going to the doctor because I had these heart palpitations, and they were testing me for that. I had blood tests. I wore an ECG monitor for a day, spoke to a heart consultant at the hospital. I had terrible, terrible headaches. Similar thing, got an eye test, was just trying to find out what was wrong. And they didn't have an answer for me, basically. They said, okay, you've got generalized anxiety disorder. They prescribed me some propranolol, which is a beta blocker. But what that does is it helps the symptoms. It doesn't cure the anxiety disorder. So I was like, okay, obviously they helped. But I was like, this isn't a solution. I'm not going to take them forever. What am I going to do? Just take these pills forever? That's not actually curing it. So then I went on a holistic journey. And then that's when I discovered Reiki. I tried acupuncture, hypnotherapy, crystals, and hypnotherapy was very powerful. And also I did a 3-hour meditation on my third eye, which I just found on YouTube. It was just a free 3-hour third eye meditation. And as I did that, I started seeing some visions. My headaches massively cleared after that point. And then as I got into learning about energy, I was like, oh, it was just a massive block around my third eye that was giving me the tension headaches every day, because tension headaches are these muscles at the front of your forehead. And that's the pain I had every day. So when I worked on my third eye, that connected me more to my spirituality, more to my intuitive gifts that I had just completely clouded and blocked off. And then the headaches for me were a physical symptom of me not connecting with that spiritual side, which, as we know now, is a very big part of me that I had completely blocked off as I'd been in this corporate, very kind of toxic masculine world, very hardworking, numbers. And I'm so grateful for it now. Even though I spent the vast majority of my time there hating it, I'm really glad that I did it. And I'm glad I got to experience that world. And it's given me, a range. Obviously, I work with words now, but I know I can do numbers and I can do all of that. So it's given me, good experience. And then I went into fashion because I was like, okay, I need to do something more fun, more creative. Again, as you can probably imagine, that also wasn't it. Within 6 months, my stomach was dropping. It was a very physical sensation of my stomach like dropping and clenching, and it just felt very, very wrong. Even though you look around and it was right, I got to go shopping in London for the day. We call it comp shopping, where you see what everyone else is doing basically, and you get paid for it and you get your lunch paid for. And oh my God, what a dream. I'd take home free handbags and it was amazing. And again, still something felt really, really wrong. But as fate would have it, I started that job. I was a merchandiser at a fashion head office. And I started the first month on a children's wear team. And then literally out of the blue, the head of the department came over to me one day. I was like, oh, you need to go over to women's wear, swim and beach wear. Totally out of the blue. And I was like, I'd only been there a month. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know my way around this enormous head office. But so I just had to pack up and leave, which at the time, wasn't great. But I ended up sitting next to my new boss for the next nearly a year and a half. He was a triathlete and he was into personal development. So he started recommending books to me. And a big one that changed my life was called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's quite a simple book. And it's basically saying that most people are going about making money the wrong way. And if you're thinking that you can just do a job and retire and you're going to get rich that way, you're probably going to be disappointed. And I read that book and my husband read that book and we were like, oh crap. Because we both always wanted to have freedom and travel. And when we read that book, our life felt even more out of tune. And, it was a long process and I won't take you through each and every step that happened from then. But it was a long journey of basically realizing that I meant to do spiritual work, that I had ignored my intuition. And there are so many times when I look back and I felt awful and just did it anyway, because I didn't know what intuition was. It wasn't a word I'd ever heard of, maybe gut instinct, but at no point are you trained to follow it. Ever. So that's why I think the book is so important and doing this work is so important, because you don't have to do those steps that I did. If I'd have just tuned into myself, if I'd have known about intuition, then I could have spent a lot more years doing what I'm the best at, doing what I love to do, doing what doesn't feel like work, doing what my way of making the most impact, the way that I have the most impact in the world, sharing my unique gifts and talents. So I just want to make that path easier, simpler, smoother for other people so that they honor their intuition, which is an incredible power that we all have. And when we honor our intuition, we honor our individuality, because everyone, I believe, has different gifts. Everyone has different things that they enjoy, that they're good at. And I think it's all like pieces of a puzzle. If we're all tuning into that thing, I think it all comes together and we can all appreciate each other's uniqueness and offer something that no one else has. Whereas we spend so much time trying to follow traditional paths or do what someone else is doing. And I even went through it in business. I realized, oh, I'm doing this business. And then I realized I was falling out of tune in my business because I was copying what other people are doing. So that's the thing about living in tune. It affects all areas of your life, your friendships, your relationship, where you're living, your relationship with your belongings. You can be so out of tune with many different things in your life. And it's applying this principle of following your intuition. Do I feel in tune with this? Does this correspond with where I am right now? Because that's what I say in the book. You can be totally in tune for a while, and then it changes. You know, relationships are a great example of that. You can be with someone and you're madly in love, but as time goes on, it then, you know, things start to change. It's time to move on. Same with the house that you're in, same with the location that you're in. So unfortunately, I don't think it's that you get in tune and then you're done. I think, unfortunately, I think it's a continual journey, an evolution, but you start to narrow in. And you get more and more aware of what it feels like to be in tune and out of tune. And you know the signals, you know what to look for. And hopefully that all becomes a bit clearer after reading the book.
I so much felt resonance within my body to so much of what you've said. And yeah, I'm sure at this point, many of the listeners that have been listening from season 1 this story sounds very familiar. Most of the guests that come on have similar stories, even though different verbiage, different walks of life, how it shows up is differently. But fundamentally, it always comes back to the same thing, to trust yourself, trust your own inner voice, and to show up in the world just as you are, instead of trying to conform yourself to appear a certain way, or, well, if I just do this job, then I'm going to be successful, when if that job, like you were mentioning, isn't actually in alignment with who you are and the way your gifts are meant to be portrayed into the world, you're just going to cause yourself dis-ease and a lot more suffering that I think really is what's necessary.
Absolutely. And it's also, for that period of time, you're depriving the world of your gifts. Like, there are people you can be helping, or animals you could be helping, or the environment that you could be helping, whatever your gifts are and your passion is. The time that we spend not doing it, we're depriving the world in some way, as well as depriving ourselves and our own sense of freedom and our own sense of flow, whatever that looks like for us. You know, I didn't stand out in maths, or I didn't stand out, and there was nothing that was like way above the rest. So when I was choosing my career path, I was like, okay, I could do this or I could do this. There was nothing that was really obvious for me. And one of my coaches said the same happens in business. You have these really successful women or men who are so good at so many things that it's actually quite easy to then be on the wrong path, because it's like, oh, well, I could do this and I can do it well, but does it feel the best? And when you can do lots of different things, I think that is the big thing to listen out for in terms of your intuition. Okay, yeah, even if you are good at something, and that can be confusing. It's like, well, I'm really good at it, and other people say I'm good at it, but it's all about the intuition, and it's all about how you feel when you're doing it.
I feel like you are literally speaking directly to me in that, because I did that for the last almost 13 years running a home theater installation business. And I spent 20 years in the high-end audio video industry, and after 7 years decided to start my own business. And at the time it felt like it was an alignment because I was good at it. I was really good at explaining technology in an easy to understand way for people. And I was very good at being able to walk into somebody's room and visualize exactly how it should happen and how it should be installed and what it would look like. And yet, as the years went on, I felt more and more drained and more out of alignment with myself. And yet I was really good at my job, and I didn't understand, well, if this is something that I'm really good at, why am I so unhappy? And that's really when I started listening to my own inner voice and seeing, okay, how can I start to shift into a different way? And maybe what I'm really actually good at is just helping people. Because at the end of the day, that's what I was doing in that job, was helping to fulfill somebody's wants and desires and solve a problem for them. Well, that can happen in many different ways. And now I'm also a Reiki practitioner, breath worker, coach, and have found different avenues on how I can actually help people in a much greater way that has a bigger impact on the world than just fulfilling their materialistic wants and desires.
Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with wanting nice things.
Right.
It's great to have those things. I did a really interesting, I called it a clarity call. I offered just 10 of them, and it was to help people who were unclear about their next steps. And one woman who I had a clarity call with, I took her in and she wanted some clarity about her business. And we basically distilled through the session that her life purpose was to curate things, so to put things together. And when she was in this state of hypnosis, she said to make 1 and 1 equals 3.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a clothing store in Scotland, and she liked putting things together. And that's something that's not obviously altruistic. But the thing was, what she loved so much about it was when she styled someone, a woman comes into the store, she combines some clothes, puts them on, the woman feels amazing. The woman feels amazing about herself. She feels empowered. She feels like her best self. And then that lit her up. So it's not like we all have to be, nurses or Mother Teresa or anything like that. There are small little ways that we can have an amazing impact on the world. And even if, you work in a coffee shop, I actually was a barista for 4 years. That was my part-time job through high school and university. And one of my managers told me there a story which has stuck with me ever since, about a couple who used to come into his old store, not the one I worked at, every day. And one day they said to him, "You didn't know this, but that time when we were coming into the store every day, our son had just died. And we weren't working at the time, they'd had to have time off work, but going into that coffee shop every day was the only bit of normality that we had. It took us out of the house. And the way that you served us and you talking to us and having a smile on your face really brightened our day." And it makes me emotional just talking about it. And it just goes to show you never know how you're impacting people. So it's, obviously we need people to do all kinds of different jobs. But it's about doing the right thing for you and doing it with love, doing it from a place of fulfillment, from your heart, and having as much impact as possible, doing whatever that thing is for you. It's absolutely not at all that everyone needs to do spiritual work. We need balance in the world. We need scientists. We need drivers. We need people working in shops. We need all the things. So yeah, I don't want it to be like, oh, you have to become a coach in order to enjoy your work or make an impact, because it's definitely not. But I think just coming at whatever you're doing from a heart-led place and just pouring your heart and soul into it, I think is so important.
I love that you touched on that being heart-led and really focusing on that fulfillment aspect, not only in fulfilling what it is, the wants and desires of the other people, but fulfilling yourself and being able to recognize where that what you're doing is that making you feel fulfilled every single day on all levels versus just on one level or partially on another level. And I have the belief that we have 4 different bodies. We have the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And in my philosophy, it's all about finding that balance within those 4 bodies. And that's how I've learned to tune into listening to those. Okay, what is becoming out of balance based on what I'm doing? And that really has been my guide to where I'm at now, of how can I listen to that inner voice to hear the answers that I need to hear. And honestly, those answers haven't always been what I wanted to hear. It would have been much easier staying in a job that I'd been doing, that I had tons of clients and I never had to worry about money. And it all seemed like, outside looking in, the perfect life. And yet listening to myself of waking up every day, dreading having to go to work, not enjoying the drive there, not really enjoying the process and having to do all of the various different steps. But then once I show up to the door, putting on a happy face and kind of basically wearing this mask of, I really enjoy doing what I'm doing, even though most of the time I didn't actually enjoy it. So what has been kind of the journey for you in really tuning into that inner voice and being able to distinguish maybe what's more of the mental voice trying to tell you what you should be doing versus that inner heart-based, gut-based voice?
Such a great question. And I love that you brought up the four bodies, because I see the world through that. That is exactly what I believe as well. And I noticed that a lot of people in the Western world, they have this imbalance with their mental body. So overly logical, everything is about the mind. And I'm like, oh no, you need to use the other bodies. So I see that the same way as you do. So I'm also very aware of trying to keep that balance and allowing them all to be, not suppressing your emotional body, also not allowing it to overtake everything else. So yeah, I'm very aware of all of that. And such a great question. And it is a journey. No one is perfect at this. But when it comes to figuring out what your intuition is trying to tell you, I think a great place to start, if someone is listening to this and they're at the beginning of their journey, perhaps, I said at the beginning, I used tarot cards since I was 14. And I find cards to be a great tool still today, because whether it's angel cards, oracle cards, tarot cards, whatever state you are in, if you are frazzled, if you are fried, if you are hungover, all the things that typically block off our intuition and allow us to or make us stop feeling those sensations that we need to feel in order to hear our intuition, no matter what else is going on, the cards will give us an answer, and it's literally written on paper. So I always recommend starting with cards. And the way that it works is you shuffle them with an intention. So you're asking a question and then you shuffle the cards and you pull one and that gives you an answer. So I'd say start there. That's using an external tool to help you understand what the answer might be. And also you want to tune into your own response. Does that feel right to you? How do you respond when you're posed with an answer? It's like when you flip a coin. Have you ever done this? When you're arguing with your partner about something, you say, well, flip a coin. And then you're like, oh no, I actually didn't want that. It gives you some clarity when you're faced with an ultimatum, like this is what it's going to be. Then you're like, oh, wait, no, this is actually what I feel, but it wasn't clear until you have something presented to you. So that's an external tool. The second thing I would say is literally your gut. Your gut is your guide. The feelings that you have in your stomach, when you have a bad gut feeling, it's a physical sensation, like your stomach drops, it clenches. Often when people are out of tune, they get problems with their digestion, diarrhea, stomach ulcers, things like that. Your stomach is very, very wise. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, I would go with channeled writing. The reason I'm pausing is because in my book I did 21 exercises. So there are 21 different exercises. So these things I'm picking out are from the books. There's lots of different directions I would go, but obviously I don't want to go through all of them. So the third one I'm going to say is writing. So the reason I say this is because I gratitude journal every single day. Every single morning, I use a diary because it has the days on it. So what are we on now? The 3rd of April, we're recording this. So when it says the date, then it keeps me accountable to doing it every day, basically. And what I find normally happens is I'll start off very much in my mental body. I am grateful for this. I am grateful for this. And as I sink into it, I'll start being a bit more free and essentially speaking from my soul. And I get such great wisdom come through, whether it's guidance, whether it's an Instagram post. And once you allow yourself to get into that writing process, it starts to take you out of your mental body. Because when we're really heavily in our mental body, your mind, thinking, logic, reasoning, all of that stuff is obviously great and very helpful. But it's those logical decisions that take you into those careers that you don't like doing, for example. So they can be counterintuitive. They can be the opposite of what our intuition actually wants us to do. So any activities which take you out of your mind, whether it's meditating, writing, journaling, channeled writing, art for some people, walking. I always say walking is my meditation. I'm not someone who sits there for hours, but for me, it's walking in nature, and I don't listen to anything. So I don't listen to a podcast or anything like that. And naturally you go into this kind of tuned out state. You're not really thinking about a lot. You're just looking at the beautiful nature around you. Driving as well. Anytime that your brain drops and you're not overly in your head, you'll find that things come in, whether it's the name of your next program, a problem that you've been trying to solve. You have to get out of your thinking brain in order to access your intuition and really allow it to speak. And I think that's a big reason why people fall out of tune, because they're so busy, perhaps through no fault of their own. You know, they might have kids, they might have caring responsibilities, 2 jobs. And when you're so busy, the body is just in fight or flight. And you're so in your head because you're in survival mode. So your brain is trying to help you to get through the day. And that can be really bad for our intuition, because then it's very hard to get to it. It's kind of the next level from your mind. And if the mind is completely running the show, then it's an obstacle to your intuition, basically.
You just gave me so much confirmation in what I have basically turned my morning practice into, is pretty much all 3 of those things that you just mentioned. My morning practice that my wife and I do is we sit down, she drinks a cup of cacao, I drink a cup of mud water, and we work with our cards. I have pretty much solely been working with a new tarot deck that I got last December, and I do a past, present, future pull every morning. And just my intention when I work with it is to give me the message that I need to see, the message I need to hear, and the message I need to feel for the day that comes forward. And again, I don't always like the answers that come up, but they always resonate and they're always relevant. And this morning, the past card was emotions, and referencing to it how our emotions based upon our past experiences can alter and manipulate our present reaction, even though that situation may not be exactly the same as what happened in the past. So bringing awareness around what our emotional state is in the moment, what our emotional state is based on how we're reacting. And the present card was thought. And it kind of draws right off of the past card, and our thoughts create our reality. And how our thoughts are based upon that emotional state also will dictate how that comes to show. And then the future card was the child, and reminding that we can work as hard as we want, but if we don't make time to play, we don't release that inner child and we don't bring out that inner essence. And every single day, the message is different, and sometimes the same card comes up in different positions, or sometimes it's in the same position, and I know that, okay, this is reminding me that I haven't learned this lesson, or I haven't implemented that. And then I journal off of what those cards resonate within myself, not necessarily based off of the description that comes in the book that comes with those cards, but really how that card makes me feel and what makes me think. And ever since I started doing this practice, I really became religious with it last October, and have now done it every single day with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 days this year. And the more I continue to do that process, the clearer and clearer that inner voice starts to become. It's almost like the intuition is just like a physical muscle. Like the more you use it, the stronger it gets and the clearer it gets, and the easy it is to decipher between that mental ego voice and that true inner intuition voice.
Absolutely. You've made some great points there, which I want to pick up on. The first one being that it's not always what you want to hear. And you're so right. And you learn that reading tarot because, for example, oracle cards or angel cards, they are like advice cards, and they're pretty much all positive. It'll be like forgiveness, like who do you need to forgive today? They're all nice messages. With tarot, you have some hard cards in there. You know, I don't want to say negative or bad because they all can be interpreted in a good way, but there's some very challenging cards. You know, you've got the Tower, you've got the 10 of Swords, you've got the 3 of Swords. So there's some hard cards in there. So it's not like every time you pull a tarot reading, you feel great and it tells you that everything's going to be amazing. That is absolutely not the case. And it's the same with your intuition. If it's telling you to leave your partner, or, you know, I was not happy about having to leave my second career. because by that point I was engaged. We had bought a 4-bedroom house. Everyone was going to be like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, you're really flaky. You did all this work to change career and now you're changing again. Like, it was not what I wanted to hear. I thought I was going to be a fashion buyer until I had kids in my 30s. Like, I didn't want to leave it so soon. So it's not that listening to your intuition is the easiest answer or the easiest path. I actually think it takes a lot of bravery. And I think often people don't want to take those steps that are actually required to live in tune, because it's bloody hard sometimes to be radically honest with yourself. So we can bury our head in the sand, we can live in denial. And it can be the harder option, the harder path, and it will require us to jump through some hoops in order to get to that ultimate outcome of feeling much better. It's not always easy. That's the reality of it. So I love that you brought that up. And then the second thing I wanted to touch on, I've forgotten now. I knew this would happen as I started flowing and talking. No, I've lost it. Never mind. It might come back to me.
I'm sure it will. Yeah, you're so right. Listening to what really is coming forth from your soul. And that's kind of the way that I've learned to interpret the intuition. It's the soul's voice that's trying to really speak and give us those messages. But it's not necessarily that they're 100% instructions. It's more that they're suggestions. And because we live in a free will state, we have the choice of heeding that suggestion or not heeding that suggestion. But it's definitely a process, and it's definitely confronting when those messages come up that we don't really want to hear, because I feel like from society, it's trained us to be comfortable, and to be comfortable is to live a good life. But when we're comfortable, we're not really living a true, thorough existence, because that's part of this life. It's not always comfortable. And so how do we begin to allow ourselves to ease into that discomfort that our intuition is trying to say, hey, things have been going great, and I think that now might be the time to pivot in a completely different direction, because that's actually more in alignment with your true path?
Yeah, great question, because it's going to be different for everyone. And I think this comes down to your values, like what is more important to you. And that has been so life-changing for me. And I think definitely one of the first 3 exercises in the book is about understanding your values, because that is how you get into alignment. If you are living in tune with your values, you will be fulfilled, and they are different for everyone. I recently posted on Instagram how I've had a shift. Mine have always been number 1, freedom, number 2, growth, and number 3, impact. And as I've been traveling the world for a year and a half, living in Airbnbs out of a suitcase, I was all freedomed out. I worked from my laptop. There was no other way I could experience freedom. And so it kind of dissolved away. And I was like, I've fully fulfilled my value of freedom. And it got replaced with simplicity. And they're actually kind of similar things. My friend said something to me about how simplicity is internal freedom. And I was like, that is so true, like having spaciousness within, whereas freedom could be more, external freedom, which is what I felt I'd fully embodied. And so now it's simplicity, growth, and impact. My husband, on the other hand, his number 1 value is fun. His number 2 value is financial security. And his number 3 value is family. So we've got totally different values. So we need different things. And when we do personality tests, for example, we're different on the Enneagram, we're different on everything. So we're meant to be totally different, and that's the same for everyone. So just understanding what your values are will help you to understand what kind of life is going to work for you. Because I despised working in offices. I can't even tell you. And when I was working in fashion, it was in like a warehouse building, so it didn't even have windows. So I literally felt like my soul was being put in a meat grinder. I was so unhappy. But someone else, may be happy as Larry working in an office. They may love it. They may love that it's reliable. They may love that it's the same every day. So it was just because my number 1 value was freedom. So I wanted to be able to work however I want, when I want, where I want. And then also I was growing externally with the personal development work I was doing, but not necessarily in the job. I definitely wasn't making an impact. So knowing my values is actually very easy to then look at it and go, that's absolutely not going to be in tune for you. But I, didn't learn all of this stuff from later. But I think that's a super easy way to know if it's worth changing things or not, and worth going through that discomfort, is simply knowing just your top 3 values, the 3 things that are most important to you in life, that you need to embody, that you need to shape every part of your life around in order to feel at ease and like yourself. And that is a really good way to, I think, judge if it's worth going the tricky path of actually making a change or not. Because I think the steps required, it totally depends on the person. It depends on the situation. If it's a career change, then you may need to educate yourself differently and, take another program, or, save the money that you require. Or when I realized, okay, I need to get freedom by traveling, that meant we need to plan, okay, we're going to put everything in storage. How are we going to do this? So it really is very individual, the steps you need to take. But I think just understanding your top 3 values, you'll know whether it's you need to start on that journey or not. And I also remembered the second thing I was going to pick up on. Perfect. I knew it would come to me. It came back to me. And it was when you talked about it being a muscle. And you are so correct. Because when I used to do paid tarot readings in my business, which I haven't done for a long time now, I did them in like 2020, 2021. So a while ago. But my intuition was spot on. Like, I would do these readings and I'd be like, I've got someone called Ursula coming through, and it would be their grandma. And I was just so spot on with the stuff that was coming through. But now I'm rustier. I've still got good intuition, but I'm not using it constantly doing readings for people like I was. Now I do a lot of teaching. I have programs. I do group coaching programs, membership. So it's not using my intuition in the same way that I was. So you're completely right. It very much is a muscle. The more you use it, the more you prioritize it, the more you honor it, it gets easier and easier. It gets more and more obvious, more and more tuned in. But like anything, if you stop doing it, you stop going to the gym, that ability starts to fade a little bit. So you're completely right. It's about practice and learning. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to take a little bit of a rewind, and I really enjoyed that you made a point that your values are very different than your husband's values, and yet you guys have a very successful relationship, and are able to integrate those differences and honor those differences from each other and what each other needs, while still being able to make the relationship a success. And, I think that's a big point within our Western society, where it seems like if your values don't meet eye to eye, then that just means that you shouldn't be together and that it's not going to be able to work. And so people get divorced or, end the relationship, instead of actually putting in the work to see, okay, how can we still honor each other's values while still being in a cohesive relationship? So how have you found, or what tools have you found that have been helpful to kind of navigate that dynamic?
Great question. So we've been together a long time, November 2011. So what year are we in now? 2023. So coming up to 12 years, and we've been married nearly 4 in July. So yeah, we've been together a long time. Super happy. And I always say that what makes a relationship work is being opposites, but having the same long-term goals and like vision for where you want to go. Because we are total opposites. Like, he is a maths person, I'm a words person. He's an extrovert, I'm an introvert. He loves like sports, I am the worst person in the world at sports. Like, we're just total opposites in every way, but then we bring to the relationship, like, and for example, he's dyslexic and I love words, so it's like, oh, but he loves talking on the phone. I hate having to call companies and talk to them on the phone. So we're a perfect match. And I think it's actually so good to be opposites, because what we bring to the relationship adds up to one. But we both had the same vision. Like, we're both really loyal. We both want to have children. We both value traveling. We both have the same vision for the future. We're trying to get to the same place, and we want all of the same things. So we're getting there together using this full set of skills and qualities that we both bring to the relationship. And I've noticed this. I mean, my parents aren't together, but my grandparents, my dad's parents they've been together. They're now in their 90s, been together since they were 16. My husband's grandparents, same sort of thing, together their whole lives. And they both embody this dynamic of being opposites and have been together, nearly 80 years. So I think there's something to be said about and opposites attract, essentially. It's like opposite ends of a magnet. You bring to the relationship what the other person doesn't have. And I think it's about making sure you're going in the same direction and you want the same things and you're building the same vision for the future, which we absolutely are.
And I think also being willing to flow with the relationship, because just like you touched on, values are going to change, dreams are going to change, wants are going to change. And it's about not being so rigid within your beliefs that you can allow that to start to change. And my wife and I, kind of, again, similar to you and your husband, we lived the last 4 years in a self-converted school bus, traveling all over the country. And during COVID, we kind of got stuck singularly back in Washington just because many of the national parks were closed and it wasn't as easy to travel around during that time. And that pause really made us become aware of, we've really enjoyed traveling. We've enjoyed going and seeing all of these different places that we wouldn't have otherwise, but we also really enjoyed just kind of being in that one spot and not always having to change scenes. And that started us thinking of, okay, like, where would we actually want to live? And now here we are, we've moved into an apartment in Virginia, and we do still have the bus, but we're no longer living in it, and feel much more grounded by being in a space where I can have an office again and have a place to work and not always have to worry about, is there going to be noise where we're parked at or anything like that. And so I think that's a big thing as well, is to be open to things changing and allowing space for both individual people to continue to grow as themselves so that the relationship can also grow together. And you brought up a really interesting point that I use a lot in relationships when you were talking about that fashion of designing clothes and 1 + 1 = 3. And I always use that analogy within a relationship, because two whole people, 1 + 1 = 3, it's almost like the relationship is a new person. And how that relationship shows up in the world is very, very different than each unique individual just showing up as themselves.
Such a great point. I want to add that to my answer, that we both have a growth mindset. So one thing that's really influenced me is this idea by a psychologist called Caroline Dweck. I believe her book is called Mindset, just Mindset. And she basically says everyone either has a fixed or a growth mindset. So this is another lens that I look at the world through, like the 4 bodies, that I notice fixed or growth mindset. And we both have a growth mindset, which definitely has allowed us to grow since we were 19. We met, I was in my 2nd year of university. He hadn't even gone to university yet, been through multiple different careers, grown so much. We're completely different people many times over. When we first met, he used to say it's not a meal without meat. And now he eats loads of vegan and vegetarian food. Like, we both have changed so much because we both have a growth mindset. And obviously I said, my second value is growth. So I could not be with someone who had a fixed mindset and just wanted everything to stay the same, because I would have outgrown them. Whereas we're both always growing, and a fixed mindset would be fine if you also had a fixed mindset. But we both have that growth mindset. So I want to add that to my answer, because that is such an excellent point, especially if you are into personal development, because you grow so quickly all the time and you're always changing and always evolving. And I think that's also helped. He's more spiritual now, actually. But when I first started doing this kind of work, he wasn't at all. but he's very open-minded. So, that's definitely challenging when you're with someone who's like an atheist or agnostic and you're doing tarot readings and you're teaching about energy. But actually, because he's open-minded, he's got a little bit more into it, and he's read some Hay House books and, listened to some podcasts and things like that. And he's into personal development because he's into sports. So there's a lot of rugby people that now do personal development podcasts. So he'll listen to those. And there's not, a world of difference between spirituality, personal development. It's all about personal growth. So we're both into growth, even if he's not going to be doing Reiki anytime soon, or like the specific things that I do. He's appreciative of it and open-minded. And again, because we're opposite, I've opened his eyes to that world. I don't know if he'd be as into it if I wasn't, living it and doing it all day long. And he keeps me grounded. I always say I could not be with a super spiritual person because I would float off into the clouds. I could philosophize all day. I could talk about energy and the universe just all day. So if I was with someone who was talking about that as well, I don't think we'd get anything done. So it's really nice that we have that balance between us.
Such great points. And I love that it's a really good point that the right people always come into our lives at the right time for the right reason, because it helps us to maybe see that different perspective that we wouldn't have seen otherwise if we hadn't been with that person or around that person, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or a work relationship, what have you. It really gives us that ability to, at least if we have that open mind, to see another way and then slowly start to lean into that. And, I seem you and I are very resonant, and your husband and my wife are very resonant because we were kind of the same. I've always been a very spiritual person. Granted, I went through a phase in my life where I was agnostic and was like, okay, I'm only going to believe what I can tangibly see. And then after several experiences, I realized that, okay, there's way more out there than what I can physically see. So I have to be open to that too. And whereas my wife, she didn't grow up in any sort of religious background in her family, was never really spiritual. And as I continued to dive deeper into my practices and my spiritual path, being that she was open, she slowly started getting into it as well. And, now she works with the moon in all of its phases and does a lot of the witchy stuff and works with cards and is a cacao custodian and is going to be holding a ceremony for our community coming up here at the end of the month. And it's just beautiful to watch at how people can shift and change as they start to see those new paths and see those different ways of, okay, just because life has always been this way, it doesn't mean it always has to be that way. I can change and I can be open to new, different ways and perspectives.
I love that. Such a good point. And yeah, sounds so similar. Very, very similar to my relationship.
So I think now is a perfect time to take a segue into our embrace and expand guest question of, Liz, what did you have to embrace in your life in order to expand into the person you are today?
Such a good question. And I would say it was realizing that I had some part to play in the situations that I didn't enjoy being in. So this was a big lesson that I learned in my teenage years, because my stepfather was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic, but has been sober for the last 2 years because he spent 6 months literally about to die on an alcoholics ward in the hospital. And then when he came out of that, they said, if you drink again, he's Irish, he used to drink a bottle of Jameson whiskey every day. And they said, if you drink again, you'll be dead in a year. So he's a recovered alcoholic now. But because my mum left my dad for him when I was about 12. And when I moved in with them, his adult daughter died within 6 months suddenly of a brain hemorrhage. So, his 2 children had grown up. They were like 30. I move in as this teenager, the youngest. So my older brother and sister were already grown up. So I basically moved in as this only child that wasn't his. And he's an alcoholic. And within 6 months, his only daughter dies. So, he really took it out on me, was very abusive. It was awful. So my whole teenage years were absolutely miserable for multiple different reasons. But eventually, when I was a little bit older, I think I was probably like 17, 18, like the end of my teenage years. And I was just looking at the situation and we hated each other. And my mum was at her wit's end because she was like, I just wish you guys would get along. I was like, how could I possibly get on with this abusive, horrible, alcoholic man? I just, I thought there's absolutely no way. And I don't know if it was, a message from spirit or something like that. But one day I just realized, what if I approach the situation differently? And I'd been coming at it from this victim place because obviously, I was in some ways, but it wasn't getting me anywhere coming at it from that place. And one day I just thought, okay, I'm just going to try approaching this differently. And I basically decided in a way to forgive him. And I started to come at him with a fresh slate. Instead of me approaching the relationship with all this bitterness, being closed off, resentment, coming at the relationship as if he's this horrible person because that's what he'd shown me, I thought, I'm just going to come at it completely differently. What happened? It completely changed. And now, like, he's probably one of the biggest supporters that I have, him and my mum. He is such a big cheerleader for me. He always says that, like, my book changed his life, and like, he is literally one of my biggest fans. And it just completely changed. And I know that's not possible in every situation like that, but it completely changed for me when I realized that if I approach it differently, which was the only option I had, I tried all these years, it seemed completely hopeless. But I tried to approach it differently, and it showed me that actually, if you approach things differently, it has the potential to completely change the outcome. So that is what I want to share. And that is what I embraced and accepted, the situation that I was in, and that even in the worst situations, there's something we can do, whether it's just how we think, the way we approach it internally, or our behavior can completely change the situation that we're in.
Mm. Yeah, it really reminds me of that saying, the as within, so without, because you decided to change your internal perspective on that situation. And then it immediately had a direct effect on that external situation, even though I'm assuming he didn't choose to change anything in that moment, but just by you changing gave the opportunity for a change in your reality to actually happen. That's so amazing.
And I realized that he's very, very sensitive. And my reaction to him being so horrible, which I think a vast majority of it I don't even remembers because he was so completely out of it. But I'd completely closed off. So he felt rejected. And now, especially now he's sober, I can see his real personality, and he's very, very sensitive. And he, obviously has some issues behind the scenes from his childhood and things like that, which have contributed to him being an alcoholic in the first place. So he does not want to feel rejected. He hates it. It was so triggering for him. And because I'd completely closed down and pushed him away, that angered him because he felt deep down rejected. And I think he wanted me to accept him. So yeah, it was a huge realization for me. And yeah, I think we're often more powerful than we realize. And even when it seems like we're complete victims, I think there's something that we can do, whether, like I said, it's just how we approach it in our head or the way we speak to someone on the situation. I think there's always something we can do to at least make it a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, such a beautiful point. It's that you do always have the power to make a situation better, even though it seems like it may be hopeless at the time, but that possibility is always there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, as we start to kind of near towards the end of this episode, what would be one last tip that you could give the listeners if they really resonated with what you had to say, but really don't know how to start listening to their intuition? How can they begin to tap into that, maybe aside from just like what you've already talked about of really using some external tools?
I would say trust it and try it. I think everything is an experiment. I'm doing energy experiments all the time. Entrepreneurship is an experiment. Intuition is an experiment. So just go with, okay, I'm going to trust it and I'm going to try it and I'm going to see what happens, because that is how you learn. And I said earlier on how I used to have these awful feelings in my body and then do it anyway. And it's because from those situations, I saw the outcome and it went horribly wrong. And then I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I got the signal, I ignored it, and then that happened. So it's like trial and error. So if you want to intentionally start listening to your intuition, then take a minute, tune in. And by that, I mean, just empty your mind, go into your body, imagine yourself kind of going into your heart space, and then see what answers there, try it, and then see what happens, and just practice, try and be brave enough to experiment. It's okay if you go wrong. I don't think we ever really go wrong. I think it's all just us honing our skills to be able to learn. And the same is true with intuition. Just trust yourself, practice trusting yourself and trying it and see what happens. And then you'll be able to refine that skill and get better and better, narrower and narrower as you build up that kind of reservoir of experiences. Okay, I tried that and that happened. I tried that and that happened. This is how all great things are made. The light bulb, for example, any inventions, they tried so many times, hundreds and hundreds of times to finally get it right. It's the same with intuition. You just try and try and try. You don't give up. You don't overly criticize yourself or judge yourself. You just keep practicing and see what happens and play with it. Come at it from an energy of lightness and play. Don't be so serious about it, because when you're serious about it, you're hard on yourself and you're more likely to give up if you quote unquote fail. So just play, just see what happens. And as you do that, because like we said earlier, it's a muscle. So you have to practice in order to get stronger and stronger with it. So that was what I'd say.
Wonderful advice. So for those of our listeners that are really interested in your work and maybe would like to work closer with you, do you have any sort of programs or anything like that they can start to look in? And I'm going to leave all of your Instagram, your website in the show notes below so people have an avenue to be able to find you there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my book is called Living in Tune. I have just had a program certified. So I have a spiritual coaching certification program called Spiritual Coaching Academy. I also have a membership for women called Sacred Sisters, and multiple other programs. So Instagram is where I'm most active, and it's at I am Liz Roberta.
Wonderful. Well, Liz, thank you so much for your time and bringing your wisdom and really sharing with our listeners how they can really start to begin to tune into themselves.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. As always, I greatly appreciate you being here, listening, messaging to the show, and how much it's changing your lives. So thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.